This is the Cultural Fluency Podcast with Angèle Preto, the French coach. That's me. And today, in episode number 1, I am with Jacqui McGinn. Jacqui is an energy healer, hypnotherapist, and writer for intuitive and creative people. And that would include me, as we have been working together since 2017. So thank you for being here, Jacqui, for the very first episode, and welcome. Can you introduce yourself for people who don't know you and tell us a bit about what you do, who you are?
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been since 2017, hasn't it?
It is, yeah.
Woo, quite a journey.
Yep.
Yeah, so energy healing and hypnotherapy kind of before that, my career has always been and still is. I'm still a Japanese teacher, and I've been an English teacher in Japan and in China and for students in the UK. And so there's always been a kind of communication relationship focus. And as we all know, communication is what makes or breaks relationships, basically.
Yes.
And the ways we communicate can harm as well as heal and help and connect. So it's helping people who are, I suppose, kind of only used to the harm version learn about the version that connects and heals and know what that feels like. So that's where the energy healing and the hypnosis comes in. So, yeah.
Yeah, on your website, you say that the systems of the world we're living in, so systems of communication, the structures of the world, they don't reflect who we really are as humans, and they come from a wounded humanity. Can you explain this a bit further, or would you like to speak to this situation, which is not ideal?
Yeah.
And how that came to be, how we can improve it?
A lot of it kind of, so it's like when people are wounded, there's often some kind of protection mechanisms that go around the wound to stop you feeling it. And so when you and often kind of like the protections of seeking power, or trying to kind of like overpower others, or kind of like give away power so that you stay small and safe, like both ends of the spectrum. And that's what we've got at the moment, is that we've got power structures in place that are coming from all of this protection around wounding that's deeper down, that hasn't been healed. And so that's not who we are. That's we're capable of so much more than that. And when you go inside and you can find out the root of the kind of power imbalances inside, and the protection mechanisms keeping those power imbalances in place between people, and also between kind of like people in positions of political power, influence, and lay people, the more we can get in and do the healing work, that kind of means that these protection mechanisms aren't necessary any longer, the more we can live in a world that reflects the best of who we are. And we don't have these kind of like power imbalances that kind of create huge chasms between the haves and the have-nots, and all these polarities and divisions and divisive thinking that we've got at the moment.
So yeah, this is the vision towards which you're working towards, and should I say we are working towards, because you also mentioned that these are beliefs that are held by many people around the planet, and that when a critical mass of people realize that this power that they have, then we will live in a different world with systems that work for everyone. And you believe that many people already have this vision. However, it's far from being a majority. Clearly, I mean, that would include you and me. And I know a lot of people that probably will come on the podcast later that have a similar vision, but it's very far still from the critical mass.
Yeah. And I think, we might have slightly different, we'd use different language. It might be a slightly different angle depending on like what experiences we have. But yeah, I mean, power and communication is something I've studied a lot, so that's kind of the lens that I see it through. But it gets enriched and strengthened by talking to people with slightly different versions of it, and that's all part of the communication piece, isn't it? It's kind of welcoming the differences, welcoming the new angles that can kind of enrich and sharpen your take on it.
Would you say that this just like, I mean, that reaching this kind of vision or this kind of mindset just happens through being in touch with different people? Or would you say that it's a very long journey that has taken you there? You know, for people who don't have this mindset at all, or who feel like, oh yeah, this is good, but this is very far, like, how do I become that person? How did you become that person?
I suppose, yeah, I mean, my kind of breakdown / spiritual awakening before that, I was utterly powerless. I didn't, you know, I didn't even vote. You know, it's like, I don't see the point. Kind of, you know, it was around the time the Iraq war was happening, and it's like, you know, there's nothing I can do about that. While people are out on the streets protesting, and you know, they're taking some kind of action on it. So yeah, it did take, in my case, yeah, like a massive, I suppose, yeah, cosmic kick up the backside to realize, no, wait a minute, you've got power, and yeah, and you can use it. Yeah, in my case, it has taken a long time, but I think everybody does have this sense. It might just be buried underneath conditioning, but we all have this sense that, like, actually humans are good. We might have been trained out of it, but it just makes sense, you know, that we gravitate towards kind of like kind-hearted people. We kind of instinctively know that that's the best of who we are.
Yes, I mean, as you know, I believe that. There are a lot of people who don't believe it at all. I do have a lot of conversations, well, maybe not a lot, but it still happens that I have conversations with people who have a very different set of beliefs. And well, you have that on the one hand. On the other hand, we have people who speak about spiritual awakening as if it's a wonderful experience and just only good things. While on the other hand, like you and I and the people who have had spiritual awakenings all know that it's, you know, how did you say, a giant cosmic kick? How did you say that?
Yeah, cosmic kind of like kick up the arse.
Right. I hope there aren't too many children listening, but yes, that's what it is. So it feels like it's really challenging to have an integrated vision and to not feel completely powerless, even if you start seeing pieces of it. It's difficult to really feel empowered with it. And so I believe this is what you help people with, right? You are definitely helping me with
that. And because you know we've all got a part to play in it, which is kind of our gifts, experiences, the lessons we've learned, all contribute to it, but not on our own. And I think that's one of the keys, is kind of like, none of us is here to kind of like save humanity on our own. The whole point is to come into relationship and connection, and to do it collectively, contributing our own contributing our gifts and insights and lessons, while supporting others with theirs, and you know, helping each other share. I suppose, yeah, like the podcast is, isn't it? It's kind of helping each other share.
Yes. This, however, is the opposite as from what we see in all the movies, like all the superhero movies, where like there's this one person that's exceptional, or even some religious beliefs, like for example in Christianity, there's this belief of Jesus being so superior to all the rest of us, and that it would take one person, but one special person. And of course we see it continually not happening, and I think it's not even really possible. I do think that one person can change the world, but not alone.
Yeah, and I think you know, a lot of, especially, you know, the teachings of Jesus have got kind of corrupted by power structures of the church
Mm-hmm.
that wanted to put a certain view across, especially like a male dominant view across. And you know, all the kind of like Gospels of Mary Magdalene and all of this work can kind of, you know, bringing her back into power within that story is really important. And I think, you know, I don't think Jesus himself as a person would particularly like how he's been portrayed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think he was actually so in his heart and so loving that actually he would he'd be appalled at the like being seen as superior, when it's like, no, that's not it, that's not what I'm teaching. Like,
How, well, I don't know if you have an opinion about that, but how as a society or even as a species did we manage to corner ourselves into this, like, it seems that we are moving more and more towards a dead end, when if we keep doing what we are doing, mostly it's not going to work, and it's very soon going to become obvious to everyone that it's not working. And how can we help move away from that, or move towards something more sustainable but also better for everyone? Because as you said, like, it's not just male centric, it's like the white cisgender heterosexual male who's also rich and able-bodied and neurotypical and I stumbled upon a TikTok a few days ago where a person calculated that it was roughly 5.7% of the population who fit this this description.
wow.
And they believe that they are the majority, or some, and actually most people believe that they are the majority, and at the end of the day it's 5.7% of the population.
5.7. Wowzers.
Someone on TikTok, Ms. Lovanats.
It would make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, it goes back to that power. Like, these are all kind of stories that have been shared.
Yes.
Around, yeah. So that we've just like been conditioned to accept as true. That you know, that's the way to see the world.
Yes.
So
we're all kind of looking at the world through the very small, narrow lens of the perspective of these very small minority who has managed to place themselves at the very top of the so-called food chain, and actually use that kind of language too, which is scary, or social ladder. So you always have an idea of an hierarchy, and it's easy for the rest of us, you know, the 95 or 94.3 remaining percent, to be like, okay, like completely, we don't have power against any of that, or we only have the possibility to be angry, and we also know that doesn't work. In your work, you have really been doing a lot, particularly from, I can say from my perspective, you've really been helping me with moving away from the kind of blocks that I've been having. And I think it's really, really helpful. Maybe you can tell us a bit more on how you help your clients with that. Like, concretely, how do you do it?
Yeah, so it tends to go to power dynamics in relationships, and often kind of that's coming from like parent-child dynamics that we have. You know, we know more about how to raise kids now, but most of us had parents who just kind of unconsciously followed what their parents did. And that's often, you know, using you know, these ideas that children should be seen, not heard, and that they're kind of inferior beings rather than they're different and have developing brains and certain needs at certain times. And so this kind of, like, you know, imbalance of power between parent and child leaves a mark, and it you know, leaves us going off into the world still expecting imbalances of power. And especially, you know, when there's been wounding, when we haven't got the love that we've needed, or we haven't felt seen, or we've felt dominated or manipulated even into being what parents needed, because they're left with needs that were unmet from their childhood. That it's kind of, you know, the more we can go in and meet these needs and heal these wounds, the more the kind of power dynamics ease off, and the more that we can kind of come into relationships in the here and now more present and with the best of who we are, rather than kind of reenacting like childhood wounding.
Do you think that this is the origin of the most widespread problem of humanity, which is the I'm not good enough? I mean, some people say it's the most widespread problem, that just most everybody has the I'm not good enough mental block or wound. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, I think pretty much everybody has inner critic parts of their mind, and the inner critic parts of the mind are protective parts of the mind. And so, you know, like in the work that we've done, it's like the parts are like little beings on the inside that kind of copy dynamics. And so the critics kind of, they have good intentions. So if they're telling us, you know, you're not good enough, they think they're you know, getting us to be better. You know, the you know, we'll be accepted more in society, we'll be loved more if we just do this. And so it's so interesting how you can you know, you can talk to these kind of little beings, you can talk to an inner critic and find out, you know, why are you doing that, why are you being so mean? And then when you find out why, from a place of non-judgment, from curiosity, not, you know, because none of us respond to kind of being judged or shamed, but when you come at it from, like, you know, an open-hearted place of like, okay, I get that you're trying to help me in some way, what's going on there? And then when you can when you can come at that place, the inner critics can soften and tell you why they're doing it, and go like, well, I'm worried, you know, and usually there's some kind of fear or worry that if you don't do that, something bad's going to happen. And so that's why, you know, they can have this relentless, like, you're not good enough going on. So yeah, I think it's like an internalized part that's kind of trying to keep us up to, I mean, obviously, like, there are kind of generalized standards in society as well, like, you know, the Instagram perfection, social media perfection, and you know, the perfect body, the perfect life, you know, doing everything that you need to do, like being like affluent and helping people, and, you know, all of these, but having the perfect relationship, the perfect body, the perfect diet, exercise routine, all of these things, you know, we can easily kind of slip into like comparison, and often, you know, there's a lot of industries that profit from this not good enough, like, you know, the beauty industry, the diet industry. Obviously, like, influencers can, you know, there are like ethical influencers, and there's the ones that, you know, are in it for money. So yeah, there's a lot of profit to be made from these insecurities and not good enough. But if you go into our minds, there's a positive intent. Yeah.
So, but we have to do this, like, because this is all mostly going on subconsciously. So it's something we have to do at a deeper level. Like what you mentioned with the thought, that sounds like internal family system, which is one of the tools that you're using, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not, just to be clear, like, I'm not kind of formally trained in internal family systems, but I'm trained in parts therapy, and internal family system is a kind of parts therapy, and it's just, I think it's just the most sophisticated model of it that we have. It's very compassionate. It's kind of, you know, it's not us that's broken. You know, it's like our minds are doing the very best they can in very difficult situations to survive and keep us safe and protected as we move through this world created by a tiny fraction of the population, built to suit their needs.
Yeah, or not even, because I mean, we also know that, for example, toxic masculinity is also affecting them in very negative ways, and that feminism is also for men, and even the most powerful men would benefit from it. But it's kind of challenging, because we know these things, or at least you and I know that people would benefit from a more compassionate approach and a more perhaps equal approach. But on the other hand, we all have our inner critic, and then there is practically a whole world that is built on top of the inner critics and thriving of the insecurities. And as you mentioned, because you have a lot of people who are just in it for the money, and perhaps some of them who don't really know what they are doing, and they just see that it kind of works by their standards, and are oblivious to the bad sides. But the bad sides are very real, and the more we move forward, the more we are going to be caught, or the bad sides are going to catch up with us. Climate change, generally oppression of some entire populations, and a lot of people tend to accuse capitalism of the problem. And I think capitalism is, one, not going to go away, because it has been here since the 17th century, and it has been very successful at steamrolling everything else out of the planet, unfortunately. And it seems to be something we're going to have to work with, because working against it, I mean, some people have tried, and they're not here to speak about it, mostly. But I don't feel that capitalism is really the main issue. And I mean, if it is, we're doomed, right? Because do you have feelings about that? Do you feel that there is a way to adjust it or to work with it, or is it hopeless?
I think the thing with transformation and problems is that, and I know this from like training and marketing, that we would love to help people. We would love to be in a place where we prevent problems. But unfortunately, we generally don't act until it gets painful.
This is very true.
And so, and I think that's going to be true collectively, with I mean, like, even looking at like the pandemic, like, once our healthcare system started getting overwhelmed and we could see how awful this problem was, we acted, and we acted in very, very powerful ways. I suppose, I mean, it was a very clear cause and effect, which maybe is not quite so easy to see with something like climate change. To be honest, I mean, I have hope and belief that we will sort it out in time. I don't know what it would take to get enough people to really register the connection between what we do in our everyday lives and the problems out there. But I do believe it's possible.
Would you say that, like, because you speak about reaching a critical mass at some point on your website, so would you think that it's just slowly but surely growing, and that we eventually will reach enough people?
Yeah, that's true. Thanks for reminding me of that. Yeah. So I suppose, so there would be that end as well, that getting to a critical mass, and maybe that was it. Maybe that's what happened with the pandemic as well. Like, a critical mass of people got how serious it was, and the entire planet, every single person on the planet was affected. By it. And I mean, obviously, I don't know what happened in every country, but I know,
or the vast majority.
The vast majority of people stayed at home. and were confined to our homes for months. Yeah, I mean, I suppose kind of like, yeah, hopefully they will get to this critical mass. And also this idea that when the idea of something like the 100 monkeys,
I'm not
where
familiar with this.
so there's research that shows that kind of there were monkeys on an island. I might not have the details right, but there were monkeys on the island that learned how to, it was either kind of like open bananas or open some kind of nut or some food source. And it got to a point where monkeys on other islands who had no contact with them were able to do the same. So there is some kind of like deeper level of kind of connection beyond being in the same physical space, where information can go out and I suppose kind of like activate people.
Right, sort of a subconscious transfer of information
in certain directions. But yeah, these are problems that are going to take a lot of people working together, being able to I suppose like stay in your own lane and let an expert who really knows their stuff handle that part of the problem, and you stick with what you're an expert in and you handle your part of the problem, knowing that they will kind of all connect up.
Right, so that requires a lot of faith to reach this point, because so far we do witness a lot of, on the one hand, people not being really in their lane and just trying to handle things that they are clearly, or to speak at least about things that they are not really competent with, and that can create a lot of, like spreading fake news, things like that, that can create a lot of issues. On the other hand, there's a lot of people having some sort of imposter syndrome, not trusting what is their lane. And actually, I think it's the bad clash between those two groups which create the really big information problem that we have, is that the people who really know don't so much dare to speak up, and the people who don't really speak very loudly, or sometimes the people who really know do dare to speak up, but because their opinion is a lot more nuanced, it doesn't work very well with social media. Social media really likes very strong statements. And I find that really challenging. I think the solution lies with the people who really have the expertise, and they need to somehow demonstrate their expertise, because, well, I mean, you can't make idiots shut up. Like, that's one of the things, like, it's one of the principles in my life. Like, you're never going to make an idiot shut up, and you're never going to be louder than them. It's about doing your own work as best you can, right?
Yeah,
so
and
that's what you help people with.
I think a lot of this comes from getting to those deeper levels of intuition. And I think when it comes to things, especially like the climate and our connection to nature, our relationship to the earth, our physical bodies are the kind of most direct link that we have. And the bodies tell the truth more than they are absolute truth tellers, and they can tell us no. It's just that kind of the mind can be powerful, and the mind can drown out the communication from the body. So a lot of this work, a lot of this inner work, is about kind of like softening the dominance of the mind, so that the physical body can speak, and so the emotions can speak, so that when anger comes up, we know from the work of Carla McLaren, anger's saying, okay, my boundary's been broken, and also this is what is important to me, this is what I value, this is why I get angry. And what you were saying, going back to imposter syndrome, that's something I've definitely gone through. But like, you know, a lot of people kind of like have the imposter syndrome and do it anyway. And
Mhm.
I've gone, you know, I've stepped aside from the communication side, even though, you know, I have a degree in linguistics and I've been a languages teacher for over 20 years. It's still, you know, the communicate, like, it is complex, it is a big
Mhm.
topic, and no one can ever know every single piece of it.
Yes.
But still, I've kind of let the, like, oh no, I don't know enough to,
Mhm.
you know, the imposter to but what I've noticed is, like, when I get really angry, is when there's poor communication, which is really showing me, you know, what's important to me, what I value, and especially
Yes.
communication that's causing way more stress, upset, and harm than is really necessary. You know, and it is, you know, learning to process the anger, because there's, you know, the imposter, like, wounding
Mhm.
around it was kind of making the anger too strong, and if I, you know, communicated from that anger, it would have been harmful in itself.
Right.
But learning to kind of, you know, process the anger and find the wounding behind it, meant that I, you know, I'm much more able to kind of step into this place of, I suppose it's kind of a, it's a place of power with it, but there's a humility with it, and the knowing
Mhm.
that, yes, I know a lot about communication compared to, like, the average person. There's one hell of a lot I don't know. So I am,
Mhm.
you know, and I could be learning for the rest of my life, and there'd
Yes.
still be, like, plenty to learn. So yes, the, you know, the imposter syndrome, yeah, it's played a big part in my life too, and it's
Mhm.
it's taken a lot of kind of healing the wounds, and find, you know, letting the emotions show the way to the wounds,
Right.
to be able to, you know, move from that place with a, like a humble confidence is
Mhm.
probably the right way
So
to.
yeah. So this requires a lot of mindfulness, right? That's at the core. The way there is mindfulness, right? Just
Yeah, and
even be
yeah,
aware of your own emotions. There are a
yeah,
lot of people, even among my students, for example, because I share a lot about meditation in my own work as a French coach, because it can really help learn a
yeah,
language to be able to meditate and be mindful. Um, but I've had students telling me that they can't meditate. For example, as soon as their mind becomes a little bit quieter, they get overwhelmed with a lot of memories, negative feelings, really like overwhelming amount of basically stored emotion that just as soon, because these emotions want to come out to be healed, right? That's what I told
mm,
them. And then we both know that. But they can't do it because it's so overwhelming. And at the beginning, you have to be really soft with it. And if you have a lot of trauma that you've accumulated for
mm,
decades, sometimes, you know, like I work with people that are 40, 50, 60, 70, sometimes years old. If you have 6 or 7 decades of accumulated trauma, which you haven't processed, the very moment that you give a little bit of an opportunity for the body to like express itself, it will express itself very violently. And this
mm,
is also what some disease can be attributed to. Like sometimes
yeah,
your body just cannot take more and will manifest it as a really bad disease just to draw your attention.
yeah,
And often when
yeah,
the people have these diseases, they're like, it's too late or it's
mm,
very late.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So what would you say is a good way to maybe not avoid this problem, but like what can we do when someone is in that situation where they just, the minute they quiet their mind, it's not quiet at all, basically. It's
Yeah, I mean, I suppose kind of like my probably the top suggestion would be to use some form of creative expression or journaling
Mhm.
to get it out.
Right.
Just let it flow.
Just take a paper
Um,
and a pen and not care about what you write.
yeah, you know, make sure it's like safe and private.
Mhm.
Um, but literally just, and I mean, you can even imagine kind of, you know, because often we can get stuck in blaming somebody else for, you know, and they may well have done like horrible things, but there's, you know, they're highly unlikely to take responsibility. And unfortunately,
and even if they do, it's gonna help you very little after they
exactly even, like the healing has to come from inside. And and you know, I've been writing a book for it's taken a very long time, because it's taken me a long time to kind of like accept this communication piece about myself. But the initial stages of that book, when I kind of really committed to it, it just felt like, oh my God, I am just ranting. I am, this is like, no one's going to want to read this. This is just me complaining, ranting, blaming. You know, there is no book in this, but it was important. And giving yourself that permission to just express it, let it flow. Like, emotion is supposed to be in motion, and you know, giving it permission to flow. Actually, it's in the resistance, it's in the like, oh no, I don't want to feel this, that actually it can cause more problems. But when you know, and so for me, kind of journaling is the way. I know other people like art or doodling or some other kind of creative expression is what works better for them. But just giving it a way of kind of like getting out of, I suppose, kind of like letting a valve out, so all that kind of like pent up energy has got an escape route. That would be the place to start.
That would be the way to get started. Right. Yeah. Thank you. This is really helpful advice. I think it's actionable. I'm looking forward to receiving some feedback from the people who will try. That will be really interesting. So it's a long journey, basically, to reach a point where you feel confident. Do you think you ever get to a point where you actually feel confident in your gifts and in your, or are you going to always be scared? Or not particularly you, but everyone.
Do you know what? Probably my honest answer is I don't know.
Oh, it's okay. You don't have to know. I'm not sure if it's a good sign, because if you could tell me with like certainty that yes, there is a point, but yeah, I was suspecting that there may never be, that you get more confident.
And I think it's just kind of like the nature of like our energy levels go up and down. We kind of move in cycles. We're never kind of like, and it's never, you know, the myth of like it's always kind of like expanding and growing up. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's contracting. And during kind of like low energy contracting times, there would be probably like tons of self-doubt. But that's not the time to be taking action. That's the time to be kind of like going in, resting, doing more restorative practices. And maybe that's, you know, our minds are kind of alerting us to that, you know, like, but when there's a more, you know, when we have got more energy, we've got more like resources, we've got more kind of space to share, then we can be more confident. And I suppose, it's just kind of learning that, you know, we're not like robots that will constantly improve all the time. It's more flowing than that. And, you know, there's cycles and times for rest and times for action. And
it's about like self-awareness and understanding and accepting your cycle.
Back to the self-awareness piece. But it's interesting about, you know, because I think one of the advantages with learning a foreign language is that it helps you step aside from emotion as well. I mean, I've read that they've done studies to show that thinking in a foreign language that you didn't learn as a child means you can think more logically.
Yes, it's definitely
you can think more clearly.
Yes. I mean, this is not my native language, and I don't know that I could have this conversation as easily in my native language, because we're speaking about very complex topics that can be very sensitive. And for example, when I work with you in session, don't know how well it would work if you were speaking French. I mean, maybe I would learn how to do it, probably. I mean, of course, I speak French very well, and my French is even better than my English in many areas. But for personal development, for self-awareness, journaling, things like emotions, I find that it's a lot easier to do it in English, perhaps because I have a more logical approach to, my childhood situation, which that was entirely in French.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, like, I've also heard that the logical approach might not be the most efficient, left brain, right brain thing. Like, well, I don't know if it's a metaphor or if it's really true that you have a brain that is logical and another one that's creative. I don't know how good it is to use logical aspects so much. It seems that it could be a Western view. Like, we really, really want to be logical all the time.
I suppose the same again, that sometimes there's times when logic is better than pure emotion, and there's times when emotion is better, and there's times when a combination, like working together. And I think I have my most powerful moments when I kind of listen to emotion and then bring logic to the table.
So emotion first, logic later.
Yeah. And I suppose, and some people might have a different definition where they call emotion intuition. Or so intuition first.
Intuition first, logic. And logic later.
Logic after.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is this something that is culturally different from culture to culture? I'm thinking about that because you have lived for 9 years in Japan, and you have experienced, I assume, a very different mindset in Japan, and that must have helped you or like shaped who you are as a person, right?
Yeah.
So, like, the podcast is called Cultural Fluency. So I would love to hear more about how you have, like, the experiences you've had in Japan and how it has helped you. So far, you haven't actually mentioned any tool that we would identify as being an Eastern or Japanese tool. So yeah, tell me more about that, please. How the mindset is different.
Yeah, I think
experience.
Probably the biggest difference in mindset is that in Japan, there's much more of an emphasis on the group. That far less of an emphasis on the individual. And there's a really interesting book called The Geography of Thought that talks about this difference between like Eastern thinking and Western thinking.
Right.
And it's encoded in the language as well. But often Japanese people will not say I. They'll drop I in a sentence if it's obvious that I'm talking about myself or what I did.
And the word I is watashi in Japanese, right?
Yes.
It's extremely long as opposed to why.
Well, there are shorter ones that men can use. So, ore is like the manly I, and then boku is like the boyish I. But yeah, like watashi is the kind of neutral one. So yeah, you can drop watashi. And what I noticed is Japanese people, like, often the language can be quite vague, and that's seen as polite. That you're if you're asking directly, that's impolite in Japan. So they'll often be kind of going around the houses a little bit, like
a lot more than we do, because people do this sometimes.
And
it annoys me to no end because I don't understand what they're saying. But I noticed that also do it myself sometimes. So in Japan you have to do it, right? It's part of the culture.
Generally, to be polite, you'd only be like really direct with like really close people.
So what would be, for example, a question that would be considered impolite in Japanese? I mean, please say it in English so we understand. Like, just trying to have an example as to what would be direct or indirect.
Oh, okay. So probably a better example is kind of like in a refusal of something. That kind of, if you asked me like, oh, shall we go for dinner tomorrow? And then the answer, if I want to say no, I'm not going to say no. That would just be rude. So I'm going to say, oh, tomorrow's a little, and I don't even finish the sentence. I just leave you to kind of like take that as no. Tomorrow's a little. That's the kind of thing that I mean. But there's also I find Japanese people are good at kind of tuning in a little bit more. I had some like horrible stuff happen while I was there. My dad got diagnosed with cancer, and I just remember how amazing my co-workers were, that they were able to kind of like tune in and communicate, we're here, and give me space while I waited for the phone call to find out how he was, because he was having surgery. And so it was this beautiful balance of like feeling held and not kind of and given space at the same time. I think kind of the experience I had is like, a lot of Japanese people are able to kind of tune into what you need a little bit better.
That is so interesting, because at least in France, it's not at all the image we have from Japan. We do have the image of a collectivist society, but really we see them as extremely driven, wanting to be extremely productive, not at all in the emotions. Like that's the general, like we have several books, novels that have been written about that situation. Like there's one of the most famous French writer, Amélie Nothomb. Well, she's Belgian, but she writes in French. Amélie Nothomb, one of, I think her first book that became famous was about her experience in Japan and how horrible it was that like she was culturally unfit and no one was helping her. So it sounds like the exact opposite of the experience you have. That makes me think she probably dramatized it for effect and might not be at all reflective of the Japan situation. And likewise, just yesterday I watched a video, like a documentary from a French YouTube channel about people in Japan who are called Ikikomori. I think that's the name of them.
Yeah.
They are the people who just hide away in their room because society is so harsh. And they probably exist, but I suspect that that's a phenomenon that has been cherry-picked as like a way to help the French feel superior, because it's not at all what you're speaking about. I'm like, this is shocking.
Hikikomori, it does exist. But I suppose kind of like,
I mean,
and I suppose because I'm talking from experience, the people that I would have encountered and the people willing to talk to a white face would have had that bit more confidence.
Oh, so they're more culturally sensitive from the get-go, so it's easier.
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's another thing is kind of like the contrasts in Japan is like, speak to a Japanese person to their face and they will be so polite and so kind. Get on the train. It's like completely different kind of side gets out, where it's like, every person for themselves to get on trains. But I mean, and the schools I worked at, there is this this collaborative mentality that the students clean the school as well, it's part of their responsibility. And for a long time I was like, what the hell are they doing that? Like, why are they making them clean? Because they don't do a very good job of it anyway. But it's about it's the act of coming together to do it. It's what's kind of like cementing the group roles, the group dynamics. And they do work hard, but they're working hard together. And I mean, you obviously it can go to the extreme where there's that word karoshi, death by overwork. My last job in Japan was at a English conversation school where our lessons would start at like 6:45 a.m. and the last lesson would finish at 10:40 p.m. So, you know,
Right.
there's people going in very early before work and leaving, you know, and having lessons very late after work. I mean, admittedly, there weren't that many that would, you know, it wasn't full at that time of night, but it was still available because, you know, you don't leave before your boss is the traditional,
Right.
like the traditional way of thinking. And yeah, I suppose, you know, I was always in environments that are open to learning English, or I wouldn't have been there. So
Right.
they probably, maybe they were the more open-minded Japanese people. But yeah, in my experience, there's more kind of tuning in and collaboration and working together in that kind of environment. Yeah.
Is it perhaps they are like spirit of group that helps them work more, perhaps? Or do you feel that those two elements are connected, or is it something that just happen to coexist?
Yeah, I think it's because the thing kind of, you know, after the Second World War defeat, it was the kind of collaborative culture that kind of helped Japan get back on its feet again
Right.
afterwards. And you know, especially when like the like huge tsunami hit in 2011,
Yes.
the, you know, Japan as a country is a country that can cope with something like that because there's so much cooperation and coordination. And you know, it's a country like huge earthquakes happen, tsunamis happen, volcanic eruptions happen, and you have to be prepared for that. You know, everybody's, you know, we do earthquake drills every year, and you know, you have your earthquake kit by the door ready to go in case you have
Right.
to evacuate. So you know, it's at the back of everybody's mind.
So that also generates a lot of
Yeah.
resiliency, I assume. Makes people or
Yeah.
groups very resilient. Because, yeah,
Yes.
perhaps a lot more than we are, you know, in the countries that are not earthquake or tsunami ridden.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yes, I mean, we're almost at the 1 hour mark already. So is there something you'd like to share, or a topic that we haven't discussed that would be interesting? Like, one thing we haven't so much mentioned, which I had in mind, was globalization. And because globalization brings the best and also the worst. If it wasn't for globalization, we probably wouldn't have COVID. Globalization is also a side effect of capitalism. It's because capitalism has successfully steamrolled all the other cultures that we are even able to be so connected. And at the same time, people have never been so connected, but they also have never been so isolated and so alone, or at least some people. And I was wondering if you had perhaps tips to feel genuinely connected, either with, you know, the close family member, or sometimes also with other culture. Because right now it feels like, I mean, if I take my own example, it's easier for me to connect with people across the world than with my own family. And I don't think it's good or bad. I think it just is. You know, you don't choose your family. But I think it's still worrying that we have this hyper-connected world in which we are also hyper-individualized, and we are not so much individualized, but isolated, and also often not in touch with our own gifts, the thing you work with. So what can we do about this? What can we do to be respectful to ourselves and also to others? And I mean, I know it's a very broad question. I can't even express it concretely, but you see what I mean, right?
Yeah.
The plague of the 21st century is that we are so connected and we're so alone. And so powerless at the same time, while we have never had that much power. Well, at least in terms of technology, we've never had that much power. But we're disconnected from our natural capacities.
Yeah. And you know, I think that probably is part of the answer, getting back to our natural capacities. And I think you know, I've talked about the parts that, you know, the inner critic part or the wounded child parts, but behind all of those in every person is a completely fine center. The center that's like peaceful, and calm. All spiritual modalities speak of like, this central part. And religions point to it as well. Internal family systems calls it the self with a capital S.
Right.
Other modalities I've done would call it like unconditional love of the creator or soul. And I think it's remembering that like that part is in each of us.
Right. Each and every one, regardless of culture, regardless of, as long as you're human, you have one, right?
Yeah. And I think it's kind of really moving more, I suppose it's like a heart space, isn't it? The more we can kind of like, in the head we separate,
right?
In the heart we can accept our differences and not use our differences to disconnect, but use our differences to get more curious and explore and ask questions. And I think in that more kind of peaceful heart space is where like the true connection can come from. And from that space, you don't speak in divisive ways, you speak in kind of more connected ways. And I suppose it's kind of like the environment that like someone like me or other therapists and healers, that kind of vibe that we set up in our sessions brought outside of like a therapeutic healing environment to relationship, where you can bring in that little bit more self-awareness coming into the heart, so that you can speak emotional truth, but it's like you're with it rather than in it.
Right. Yes, this is so interesting because you describe exactly the same process that I describe for my students to learn French, and to actually not just learn French but become a French speaker. I prefer to say become a French speaker than learn French, because everyone can be learning French, but it's another story to actually be able to speak in real life. And it's really interesting because I always tell people that you need a safe space to practice and to learn, and then you need to take what you've learned in that safe space and apply it in the outer world. And it sounds exactly like what you say, with you have the space of therapy where it's safe, or it should be at the very least, because we could also have spoken about how not all therapy is safe, unfortunately, but ideally the ideal therapy space, and you make a great job of that, is completely safe. It's true, completely safe for the person in therapy, and then they learn some skills which they can then apply in their relationships outside. So how can people get started with that, with having, if they have no idea what to do? You gave the advice of journaling, but you say it's about being centered and being aware of the self, or the spirit, the thing that is fundamentally human, like behind all the conditioning, and behind all, basically the conditioning is cultural, right? While the self and the center is what's truly natural to us. But most people have it completely buried. What can they do?
And I suppose, part of that is kind of reflecting on, who are you when you're calm? What are you doing when...
What if they're never calm?
Okay, if they're never calm.
No, it's true. It's the reality for many people.
If they're never calm, I suppose that would, again, I go back to kind of like being, accepting the not calm. And like the more you fight against, or the more you're trying to fight for being calm,
right,
the more not calm is going to get activated. So
what you resist persists, right?
The more you push against it, same with us. If we really want someone's attention and they keep kind of like pushing us away, Like, generally, and we really want their attention, we're going to keep going. We're just going to kind of like up the ante with what we're doing. And it's the same with kind of different parts of us. So yeah, if there's no calm whatsoever, I think that would be kind of like taking those, exploring different ways of approaches to meditation, that maybe like sitting down and being quiet is not going to work, but maybe something that involves a bit of movement where your mind is more focused on something else.
So relying more on the body.
Yeah. So maybe yoga, without the expectation that I'm kind of, it's like, that you go to the yoga as you are.
I mean, yoga is not supposed to include the expectation that this is the Western variation that has added the expectations to it.
Yeah, but you go to yoga as you are, to meet yourself, really, isn't it? It's kind of, this is where I am now. After some of the poses, I may be more relaxed, and energy may be, calmer energy may be flowing more in me. And it's a self-awareness practice as well, isn't it?
Always coming back to self-awareness.
Yeah. In terms of, I suppose, could you give me an example of like someone who might not be calm?
People who are just really, really stressed out, sleep poorly, eat poorly, that happens a lot.
Sleeping poorly, eating poorly,
and just working, like there's such a thing as high-performing depression, and some people, they just like, they keep going through the motion, and they don't even, sometimes they are so removed from themselves they don't even realize that they're depressed.
Right. In that case, I suppose, kind of like,
if they don't realize that they have a problem, they're probably not gonna listen to this, or they probably don't have the time. But assuming they realize that, oh my God, like I have a problem, what's the first step? Okay, you are frozen.
Hello? Am I back now?
Yes, you're back.
Yeah.
So we were just speaking about, the question was, what's the first step if you realize, like, you've been on the treadmill and you haven't been taking care of yourself at all, and you're just completely removed from,
Again, I think someone in that position is probably only going to take any action when they hit rock bottom, when it gets painful.
So the action is they get the realization that it's wrong. And
and I suppose, it's kind of letting yourself off the hook if you have kind of let yourself get to that point, because it's just like, we generally, there's a lot of kind of like, oh yeah, I need to do that someday. And like, oh yeah, I should work on that, and it just kind of goes on the to-do list, and all of those parts of the mind that are keeping us ticking along, keeping it seemingly safe from being overwhelmed by emotion or wounding, they're merrily going about their thing. And unfortunately, often it does take it getting painful before we'll do anything. But I know from my experience that kind of like help shows up in some form, and if you then you make the commitment to take action, to find out how to sort it out, and often, unfortunately, that's how we learn.
So if someone is at the stage of making the commitment and wanting to do the kind of work that you describe, I assume that they could potentially work with you on that, right? So where can people find you?
So the best place, and I have an old website, hopefully by the time people will have seen it will be a new website, but it's just my name. JacquiMcGinn.com, and I've got
right, JacqiMcGinn.com, right? I'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah. And then I have, through the website, you can find, like, I've got kind of online resources. Like, I've got some kind of self-awareness journaling prompts, and meditations as well, that just kind of with a little bit of hypnosis to help calm the mind more and take you into that kind of altered, calmer state. Yeah, because hypnosis techniques can help a bit more to do that, and it's not about control. It's just about knowing how the mind works a little bit better, to be able to guide it to calming down.
Yes, very good. So those are available on your website, right?
Or through links on my website.
Through links on your website. All right, very good. Well, Jacqui, thank you very much for joining me today, and thanks to you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please leave a review on whichever podcast platforms you've been using, or a comment if you've been watching this on YouTube. And it would mean the world to me if you'd leave a comment or a review, and that really helps others find the podcast as well. Please stay tuned for the next episode, and take care.